right, we are back with King of the Mound, My Summer with Satchel Paige by West Hook. And we are on Chapter 11 today. Top of the sixth. The game against McPherson started at 1. It was a perfect afternoon for baseball. Blue skies and just a hint of breeze blowing out toward the center field. The field only had a basic grandstand, but it was packed by the first pitch. And as Nick put the tar and a rag out by the warm-up circle, he realized that the men who had been standing across the street the previous night were sitting directly behind home plate. When he mentioned that to Satch, who was carefully lacing his shoes on the bench, Satch just smiled. "Good," he said. "They'll have the perfect view to watch me embarrass their team." In the top of the first, Red made it to second base with 2 outs. Moose got a fastball on the inside corner that he muscled into the left field for a sharp single, and Nick's father, who was coaching third base, waved Red home. The throw was late, and the catcher also appeared to bobble the ball, but the umpire called Red out. As Satchel and the rest of the defense trotted onto the field, Mr. Churchill wadded out to home plate. Nick, who was rearranging the bats, was close enough to hear the exchange. "It's just call it fair," Mr. Churchill said. "That's all I ask." The umpire waved a finger in Mr. Churchill's face. "You come up and talk to me again, and I'll have the cops drag you off this field. We don't put up with belly aching in this town." Mr. Churchill stared at him for a long moment and then just nodded to himself and returned to the bench. After Satch finished his warm-up, McPherson's first batter, a skinny kid with pale skin, carefully dug into the box. Satch's first pitch was a curveball that snapped sharply just before it reached the plate. The batter swung wildly, missing the ball by at least a foot. But before Quincy could throw it back to Satch, the McPherson player turned and looked at the umpire. "That ball is funny," he said. As the crowd hooted, the umpire tapped Quincy on the shoulder. "Let me look at that." Quincy shrugged and handed him the ball. The umpire made a big show of inspecting it before turning and throwing it toward the home team's bench. He pulled another ball out of his pocket, and after he handed it to Quincy, he stared out at the mound and wagged his finger again. "Keep it clean," he said. "None of your big city tricks down here." Nick expected Satch to get mad, but instead he just smiled a smile so wide that his teeth glinted in the midday sun. "You may as well throw them all out because they're all going to jump like that," he shouted. The umpire ignored him and settled back behind Quincy, his eyes dark behind his mask. Satch's next pitch, a fastball, cleaved the heart of the plate. Nick waited for the umpire's hand to go up, but instead his voice rang around the stands. "Ball 1!" Satch turned on the mound and stared at Mr. Churchill, his hands on his hips. Mr. Churchill responded by hopping up as quickly as Nick had ever seen him move and striding across the diamond towards the opposing bench. The umpire took a few steps forward to intercept him. "What did I just tell you?" the umpire asked, his face red. "Stay off my field." Mr. Churchill ignored him and pointed at the opposing manager. "You find a real ump or me and my boys are getting in our cars and leaving." "One more word and I'm calling the cops," the umpire said. He waved at the stands near third base, where 3 giant deputies were standing, their arms folded across their chests. "I'm not talking to you, greaseball," Mr. Churchill said. His eyes were locked on the opposing manager. "A fair up now or we hit the road." The opposing manager pushed himself off the bench and ambled out toward Mr. Churchill. Despite his deliberately casual walk, there was an unmistakable glint of menace in his eyes. "I think you want to finish this game," he said when he reached Mr. Churchill. He nodded slightly at the stands. "If you and your boys walk off this field, I won't be liable for what these people do." Mr. Churchill snorted. "And then what? Do you think any traveling team will ever come back to this pathetic cow patty of a town if you run us out on a rail? In fact, I'll bet most folks won't even drive down your main street if they hear you were dumb enough to hire a crooked ump just so you could say you beat Satchel Paige." "I ain't crooked," the umpire said defensively. "Then you're blind," Mr. Churchill said. And either way, my boys aren't playing with you behind the plate. So get off this field, you dirty Chesler. Mr. Churchill's voice had risen, and his words carried clearly into the stands, sparking a cavalcade of catcalls. The group of men behind home plate were half leaning onto the field, their faces ugly and contorted, and the Bismarck players in the infield instinctively moved toward Satch on the mound. Nick's father got up from the bench and sidled over to the on-deck circle. "If this gets ugly, you go stand by those deputies," he said to Nick, his voice low. "You hear me?" Nick glanced at the 3 deputies who were still standing in a cluster, stone-faced. "I don't think they're on our side." "Of course they aren't," his father said. "But if they got a decent bone in their body, they ain't going to stand for a kid getting hurt. So you go over by them, understand?" As Nick nodded, his father crouched down, his fingers curling around the handle of a bat, and that was when Nick got really scared. His father wasn't the kind of man who was prone to exaggeration. Nick started to sidle toward the deputies, but just as he got near home plate. "Fine," the opposing team manager said, the word ringing around the infield. He pointed into the stands. "Get down here, Bobby." A short man wearing a dark suit emerged from the crowd. The deputies opened a gate in the fence, and he marched over to Mr. Churchill and stuck out his hand. "Bob Bonner," he said. I used to ump over in Kansas City for the regional tournaments." "Just call it fair," Mr. Churchill said. "That's all I ask." Bob nodded and then turned to the previous umpire and raised an eyebrow. After a long moment, he tore off his chest protector and dropped it and his mask on the ground before stalking into the stands. Bob picked up the mask and then looked out at the pitcher's mound, where Satch was calmly watching the scene. "Let's play ball." It turned out that Bob was as fair as the previous umpire had been crooked, and through 8 innings, Satch gave up only 2 hits, a soft roller down the third baseline and a dying quail to center field. By the top of the 9th, Bismarck was winning 5-0. With 2 outs and Moose at the plate, Satch strode up to the on-deck circle and lazily swung a bat a few times before taking a knee and then gesturing to Nick for a towel. When Nick reached his side, he waved a hand at Moose. "Do you know how to read a batter?" he asked. Nick stifled his surprise. Satch rarely talked to anyone during a game when he was pitching. "No, sir." "Watch his front knee. That tells you everything." Nick looked at Satch skeptically. I can't say that right now. And Satch made a little cross over his heart. "I promise that knee is like peeking at a man's cards. Is he tense because he's getting ready for a fastball? Is he sitting on that back leg because he's waiting for the curve? You read that knee the right way, and you've beaten the batter before the ball even leaves your hand." Just as Satch finished speaking, Moose hit a hard grounder right over the second baseman, and the top half of the inning was over. As the Bismarck players started running onto the field for the last half of the 9th, Satch stepped in their way. "Everyone stay on the bench," he said, "except for Quincy." The team froze. Moose glanced at the stands and then back at Satch. "Come on," he said, "not today." "I'm going to embarrass this town," Satch said, "and boy, do they deserve it." "I want to get out of here alive," Red said. "Me too," Moose said. "Trust me," Satch said. "After these last 3 outs, everyone in these stands is going to slink home without another peep." He pointed at Quincy. "Just us, nobody else." Everyone looked at Mr. Churchill, who just shrugged. "Better to be famous and dead than boring and alive," he said. And so Satch and Quincy trotted onto the field alone. The crowd had been subdued for several innings, lulled to a stupor by Satch's relentlessly overwhelming pitching. But when they realized that the rest of the team wasn't coming out of the dugout, they rose to their feet. the catcalls suddenly surging with renewed intensity. As the first McPherson batter walked to the plate, Nick shook his head. It looked strange to see a field without a single fielder on other than the pitcher. Nick glanced at his father, who was watching Satch with a hint of a smile on his face, which was surprising since he hated showboating. But maybe his father agreed with Nick that this town deserved whatever it got. Satch started off with a fastball, and the batter swung and missed wildly. Someone from the opposing bench shouted that he just needed to get his bat on the ball to get a hit, and he nodded to himself and shortened his grip. The second pitch was also a fastball. This one around the bottom of his armpits. This one around the bottom of his armpits, and he managed to nick the ball as it whistled past. As the batter settled into his crouch to face the third pitch, Nick followed Satch's advice and stared at his knee. He looked tense, like he was waiting to be bitten by a snake. And curveball flashed through Nick's mind just as Satch reared and threw. He was right. It was a curveball, and the batter was so far in front of it that he probably could have swung twice. 3 pitches, 1 out. The second batter tried to bunt the first pitch, but it was a breaking ball in his hands, and he skidded it foul. On the second pitch, he tried to bunt again, but Satch threw a curve in the dirt, and he couldn't pull his bat back in time. The third pitch, he had to swing, and he was 6 inches under a rising tom. 6 pitches, 2 outs. The third batter was the skinny kid who had opened the game by complaining that Satch was doctoring the ball. He had a little bat, not much bigger than the bat Nick had used back before he went to the hospital, and he took a half swing at the first pitch. The ball made a dull thwack as it made contact with the wood, but the swing had been late, and he hit a lazy little pop-up in foul territory halfway between home plate and first. Satch trotted under it, but at the last moment he pulled his glove away and let the ball fall to the grass. "You ain't getting off that easy," he said to the kid, loudly enough that everyone in the stands could hear him, and he didn't. Satch's second pitch started at the kid's front shoulder. But as the kid flinched, it broke violently and caught the inside corner for a strike. The third pitch was a textbook Satchel fastball, just above the knee on the outside edge of the plate. The kid just stared blankly at it as Bob pointed his fingers to the side. "Strike 3, he said. "Game over." As the Bismarck team flooded onto the field to congratulate Satch, Nick glanced at the angry group of men behind the plate. Nick expected to see them shouting things at Satch, or at least glaring angrily at the field, but instead they were filing out, heads lowered. Nick's father followed his stare and then raised his eyebrow. "Good," he said. "Maybe next time they'll think twice before flapping their mouths." And with that, we will end and pick back up with Chapter 12.